Welcome back to Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Today we have again Max Zuzolo. Every Monday he talks about all commodities. And today we are going to start with the USDA planting numbers and his reaction about the US-China trade war. Mike, how have you been these days? My first question is regarding the US planting. It seems there will be a lot of corn this season, but the planting is delayed.
Yes, and we also had a significant delay in North Dakota, specifically, Luis, that they have now come across their prevent plant date. And I think we might have talked about that last week, but they came in at about a 54% planting pace on corn this past Monday, based upon USDA's numbers. That was actually below last year when they were so flooded and cold with snow. By 3 points. And so about 1/3 of their prospective plantings are probably going to be turned into the USDA for crop insurance, and they will probably take prevent plant. The reason we think that to be the case, and this comes from a media colleague in Fargo, North Dakota, he and I had a real good discussion last week, and he explained to me that many of the people that he talks to in his circle just got caught with not being able to harvest last fall. So while they probably would have gone ahead and planted, even in risk taking that planting date past the government time period for crop insurance, had it not been for the delayed harvest, because the springtime planting price was so low, they probably would have taken that risk. But because of how bad harvest was last year, I think that probably has turned them back towards just taking the government money and keeping the crop insurance at the full amount, and that way not have to worry about getting in the fields this fall. So we can look forward to smaller corn acreage here in the United States. The question you bring up, I think, is the issue of whether USDA will address that in the June acreage report, when we should also get North Dakota's production from last year, because we still don't have that. So it seems to me we're kind of in a pathway now with the US-China trade friction starting to go up again because of this security law for Hong Kong. Maybe all of the bean longs and long beans and short corn traders who've been long beans and short corn on a spread will want to go ahead and unwind that spread and go back towards a more long corn bias because of acres, and because we realize that the hogs, the pork, and the soybeans are most susceptible to increased China-US trade frictions.
Yeah, and that's the point where I'm getting to. We talked a lot about the US-China trade war. We mentioned that in previous episodes that China could buy more from Brazil because of the devalued currency. Well, these first numbers they really did in the first weeks of May, but still they bought more from the U.S. as well.
Yes, but not enough to meet the phase one trade agreement. You know, we're talking about a 40 to $50 billion agricultural import figure that the U.S. is expecting and that the market is expecting. And now that the Hong Kong security law has been passed, it could be that China walks away from phase one just in reciprocity to whatever the Trump administration may do, which they may do before this actually airs. This program actually airs when we come on board with the YouTube update, just because they're looking at doing this by Friday at the end of the month of May. Now, it's interesting, Luis, technically, and this is for any of your subscribers that would like this information, please go to globalanalytics.biz, sign up for a free trial, and I'll send you this information. But it's really interesting because we have not dropped below 840 in lead month soybeans on the futures market in Chicago since August of last year. But if you take that away, we have not gone below that level on a closing basis since going all the way back to July of 2007. So we're talking about 12 years of staying above 840 in lead month bean futures on a closing monthly basis. And we're really on the tipping point of trying to take that out as we go into the end of May. If we do the historical side of the charts, and I think the supply side and these bigger acreage numbers that you and I are talking about coming maybe at the end of June, it may open us up to testing $8 even, and maybe even below that. So I've been getting clients on pretty high alert to get some floors underneath them if we close below 840 at the end of May.
Do you think there will be big corn leftovers this year? Because I see a very complicated scenario with all of the talk about food inflation and lack of the destruction of supply chain. And so everything is messy. It seems to be very messy right now.
Yes, and you have to add into that the African swine fever in Asia that is still not really being contained that way. It is extremely, in the words of how we look at it, it's very opaque, not clear at all. It's very cloudy and murky, what we're looking at on the demand side. I will say this, I believe that there is pent-up demand to get more corn, beans, and wheat, especially corn and wheat, in stockpiles by major importing countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, South Korea, because once the transportation backlog and log jam gets over with and gets cleared up, these countries are very worried about another COVID resurgence this fall. And I think they want to stockpile. The Middle East has done this in wheat to a pretty good degree, but even there, they may want to buy extra because of these super high food inflation prices. I think it was just this week I saw that either the corn or wheat price in South Africa had hit a record high. And this would be especially timely to happen this summer now that we've seen a new 8-week low in the US dollar index. And so I think there is some pent-up demand coming. I would put it more at the corn and wheat side. Because China buys so much of the soybeans, and I think they've been stockpiling, buying those Brazilian supplies like you mentioned.
Yeah, especially for the wheat market, you have seen more demand in these times of quarantines, right?
Yes, and we have seen a big reduction by the European Commission for the European new crop. The Ukrainian Grain Union has also lowered their crop. I think the U.S. crop is lower than USDA estimates. So if you add all that together and you have the cycles working in your favor with the hard red wheat looking at a major 12 to 14 week low just put in, and then you throw on top of that the drought that is still in Kansas and Oklahoma, I think you have the makings for the potential, probably the best potential in the last 6 months for a long-term low in the wheat market. And this is where you and I talked about maybe a counter-seasonal July rally. As we go into harvest, the yields are actually worse than the trade expected, and the market goes higher as we even harvest. So I would be very on point with that and be very watchful for that if I were a wheat farmer right now in the world.
Yeah, an additional factor is that Argentina probably will have problems to ship their crop because the Paraná River is having issues with navigation right now.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah, that is a real big player. Obviously, Argentina's meal and wheat is always a big competitor with the United States, and that's where Mexico was looking at times, and Wilmington Bulk was looking at times to go after Brazilian or Argentine sourced feed grains for their livestock. And so that, but the African swine fever is an issue. There are clients that I work with that are suggesting to me and telling me there are still big problems in China. And even the Ministry of Agriculture did put out a new note last week trying to bring that to the forefront again now that they're coming out of COVID in China. And so we're not through that issue on the demand side for the soy meal in terms of African swine fever. So if they needed to buy something or import something, it would probably be more on the meat, poultry side of the equation. And they don't need it right now because their food inflation has really cooled off, but they may need it in a couple months again.
Yes, and where the focus of the U.S. farmer and the U.S. rancher should be right now, should be on those direct payments, should be on the best market opportunity. Where are you telling the farmer to watch?
Yeah, that's a very good question because the direct payments are so substantial. We have to keep an eye on those. I think the key is that if we get a weather supply induced rally and it would stimulate a 10 or 15% rally led by the wheat in the corn market, and we can get corn in the new crop December futures up close to the 370 per bushel level. I think that's an area where I would want to put floors in place. I've already got the floors covered in the soybeans, so I feel pretty good about that. The only other thing I would say in the livestock sector, Luis, is we are finally seeing the cattle market find support and fund buying again. I would be very cautious about buying into the market right now. I would probably be looking instead if we could get another couple $3 higher in the June and August fat cattle or the August feeder cattle. Those would be places where I'd probably want to put some floors underneath me in case we did have another round of COVID later in the year. But we got through that first big summer of start to summer grilling season and the big holiday, Memorial Day up here in the United States fairly well. And the market feels pretty charged up about that, thinking that a demand low is in place. So I don't want to let that get squandered. I want to let the markets run as much as they want to, watching that US-China trade issue very closely.
Yes, another thing that I would add regarding the supply side is that a lot of Brazilian meat packing facilities are closing right now. We saw that first happening in the United States with a reduction of meat production, and now that's happening in Brazil, and we'll have significant losses.
Yes, Brazil and Argentina are both on an incline in terms of cases.
Yeah.
And what we found here in the United States was as the cases went up, unfortunately, the deaths also went up because some areas did get overwhelmed medically. And that's something you and I have talked about. It is not what we want, but we have to watch it. And you bring that up, and that's a very good point. I didn't want to bring that up because I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage of higher prices on someone who's been hurt, another country that's been hurt. But it certainly is a big issue right now because you are going into your fall and your winter in South America, and a lot of Latin America is as well. And they also tend to import a lot of red meat and poultry too that needs to be really, really watched.
Mike, always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks again.
Luis, thank you for having me again.